Okay, hello everyone. So in this last part, we are going to see some introduction to physically based simulation models. So we can wonder when we should use physically based simulation. Typically when we want accurate dynamics of motion, typically taking into account some inertia, or when the model is too tedious to model by hand or using procedure, typically when we've got lots of elements interacting together with collisions like rigid bodies, hairs, and things like that, or when we've got a complex geometry to animate, such as cloth simulation, fluid simulation, and things like that. So there is several material models that we can use. The most widely used in graphics, at least, is elastic model. So a shape is said to be elastic if a model is said to be elastic if its shapes is going back toward its original rest position when we don't apply any more forces on it. So typically, a purely elastic shape should theoretically not lose any energy when it's deformed, and all the energy would only be switching between potential energy and kinetic energy. Opposite to the elastic model, there is the one that we call plastic. And plastic material is a material that doesn't necessarily come back to its original shape once it's deformed. And we can even split into two types of material, the one that are called ductile, that can allow large amount of deformation without breaking. Typically, a real plastic bag has this type of behavior. But at the opposite, there is the brittle material that can break when they have a small amount of deformation. Typically glass or ceramic, things like that. They have a plastic behavior, they can undergo some deformation, but they break quickly when they are deformed. And finally, there is also the notion of viscosity, which is somehow the resistance to the flow, which applies to the material. We can encounter it typically when we have fluids like honey or yogurt that have a different behavior depending on the speed that we apply to them. And of course, in reality, we never have purely elastic, purely plastic material, but we've got elastoplastic material that have usually an elastic behavior for very small deformation and a plastic deformation at larger deformation. And the viscoelastic materials that have elastic properties but with some delay during the time that the speed of the fluid, for instance, go to rest or decrease or diffuse in the fluid. And now we are going to see a very simple introductory model, which is a model where we have a lot of rigid spheres that collide to each other. So if we want to have this system modeled, basically we can model them using particles. So each sphere is a particle with a position pi of t, a speed vi of t, a radius ri, and its mass mi. The sphere can collide with surrounding obstacles, they can also collide each other, and then I've got my system, which is made by this n set of particles. I know the initial condition, so I know the pi at t equals 0, the vi at t equals 0. I have only one force, which is applied to the particle, which is the weight of the particle. And the collision between particles and between obstacles are going to be handled using something called impulses. If I want to know the temporal evolution of the particle, I can apply the fundamental principle of dynamics, saying that the speed is equals to the derivative of the position, and the derivative of the speed is the gravity. I can also add another force that would be the drag, which would be minus a constant times the speed. And to integrate this equation, so this one is pretty simple, but I can add a non-linear element if I want. I can integrate it using numerical solution. saying that the speed at the next time step is equal to the speed at the current time step plus some small time step that I call h that multiplies the gravity, and the position at the next time step is equals to the position at the current time step plus delta t, the small time step, times the speed, and I take the speed at the next time step, the one that I just computed. We are going to see later why this approach is actually better than using v at the current time step. And so, if I want to handle collision, the simplest one is to handle collision with a plane, another object which is a plane, and so I can parameterize any plane by two parameters, a point, it can be any arbitrary point within this plane, but I call it A, and a normal n, a unit normal n. And I define that the positive side along the normal direction is the space which is allowed for the sphere to be, and the opposite direction is the space where the sphere would be in collision with the plane. And the parameterization, if I parameterize my plane, I can say that a point P is inside the plane if P minus A scalar n is equals to 0. And this basically can help me also to define if my sphere is above or below the plane. If Pi, the center of the sphere, minus A scalar n is greater than the radius Ri of the sphere, then it means that the sphere is above the plane. And if Pi minus A scalar n is less or equals to the radius, then it means that my sphere is actually in collision or has penetrated within the plane. So this gives me a very simple collision detection algorithm for all the sphere. I can compute this dot product, and if this dot product is less than the radius, then it means that I have a collision and I should apply collision response. And so now we can wonder which kind of collision response we should be applying to this sphere. So the most trivial one is to say, okay, we need to change the speed. Basically, the sphere needs to bounce out of the plane. And to this end, we are going to suppose that we've got an exact contact of the sphere with the plane. The sphere has a speed v, and what we can say to model the bouncing of the sphere is to say the component of the speed that was along the normal direction has to go in the opposite direction. So this is something very general. Actually, we have to consider the separating plane between the two objects in collision. In this case, this separating plane is actually the plane, defined by A and the normal n. Then this speed v, I can split this speed as a parallel component and an orthogonal component. So the orthogonal component, I can say that it's the projection of v along the normal direction, and I take it along this normal direction. And the parallel component is v minus this orthogonal component. And now I can say that the new speed is actually v parallel minus v orthogonal. And I can add some restitution or attenuation coefficient if I want to model the fact that there is some friction and there is some loss of energy during the impact. And this is the result if I apply this algorithm. I detect the collision, and when I detect the collision, I change the speed. I take the opposite direction of speed. And obviously I've got an issue. I've got my sphere that bounce well at the beginning, and at some point they go down like drowning under my plane. So from where does this problem comes from? Actually, we can notice that previously I said that I suppose an exact contact of the sphere with respect to the plane. And of course, if I have a numerical scheme along delta t, when I integrate the position and the speed, I almost never have this exact contact. I always have the sphere below the plane or already in collision with respect to the plane. And of course, if I am already beside the plane, then I take the opposite direction of the speed, but if I have some attenuation coefficient, maybe my sphere is not going to go up enough to go out of the plane. And if it's the case, then at the next step again, I'm going to take the opposite of the speed. And so I'm going to get stuck with the speed that are going to oscillate. If we look carefully, we can even see that the sphere oscillates a little bit. And as there is the weight always pushing down the sphere along time, then the sphere finishes by going more down and down below the plane. So what can I do to solve this issue? I should always make sure that the sphere do not collide at the next time step with the plane. I should ensure that the sphere are actually above the plane at the next time step. So one thing I can do, there is several approaches that we can use. The simplest one basically is just to say, okay, I'm going to translate my sphere to make sure that it's above the plane, and I'm going to consider the shortest distance, like the distance along the normal of the plane, such that the sphere is above this plane. I can compute that exactly knowing the penetration distance of the sphere in the plane. This is very simple to implement, but it's not very accurate with respect to the physics of the phenomenon, because I'm modeling some kind of translation of the sphere at a given time step. Another way to have a slightly better approximation of this translation is to not translate the sphere along the normal of the plane, but to consider like a linear approximation as if the sphere was following a straight line, and then we go back along this straight line to find the position where the sphere actually was impacting the plane. And so this is an in-between. It's less simple to implement, but it's a little bit more correct physically, although it's not perfect. And the best method is somehow to go back in time to find the exact time when the collision occurs. I can use some numerical algorithm, typically using some binary search, to find quickly the closest time where the collision occurs. Then this is actually physically correct. I find the correct time where the collision occurs, but the computational cost associated to that is, of course, more heavy than just projecting the sphere on the plane. And this is the result that you obtain if you apply the basic method where you just project the sphere on the plane. And it works already well for a simple case where there is few spheres on a single plane. And now if you want to tackle the fact that there is collision not only between a sphere and plane, but also between the spheres together. So now we need a model where we have two spheres with position P1, P2, speed V1, V2, they have a radius R1 and R2, and mass M1 and M2, and detecting the collision is quite simple. I can just check if the norm between P1 and P2 is greater than R1 plus R2. And if it's not, then it means that my two spheres are in collisions. And now if I detect this collision, what should happen? So basically we could take the same kind of approach than we did previously. In this case, the separating planes between the two objects is actually the plane which is orthogonal to P1, P2. And one naive idea would be to say, with respect to this plane, we are going to take the opposite speed. So the orthogonal component, we take the orthogonal component of the V1 and V2 along this plane. And then we inverse them so that the sphere go back to their initial direction. But it's actually not the case, and we are going to see how we can model this collision response. And for that, we are going to introduce the notion of impulse. So basically, an impulse is an integral of the force over time. And I can take some small time steps. And this impulse is going to allow me to result somehow to model a sudden change of speed, or more precisely, a sudden change of momentum, of linear momentum of the object in the discrete case, where T1 and T2 are actually only delta T. And so if I have a particle whose mass is constant along delta T, then I can say that the impulse is actually the mass times the difference of speed between the two instants. And so if I have an impact that change v toward a new speed, I can say that the new speed is the current speed plus the impact divided by the mass. So how can I model now my problem? I know that the impulse should be orthogonal to the separating plane between the two surfaces, if I don't have other constraints. So I can express the impulse as a scalar times the vector u, the unit vector u. Then we've got preservation of linear momentum. If we don't have loss of energy, the linear momentum of the system should be preserved. And I can express that in saying that the m1 v1, the mass of the first particle times speed, plus m2 v2 has to be equals to m1, the new speed, plus the m2, the new speed after the impact. And at the end, I can, playing with the equation, we can see that the respective impulse are equals actually in magnitude and opposed in direction between the two spheres. But this is not enough to find the actual value of the impulse. For that, I need a model of response, and the most common model is to consider the collision of what we call hard spheres or elastic collision, meaning that the spheres, via preserving the system of two spheres, preserve their global kinetic energy. So the kinetic energy of the system is 1/2 m1 v1 square plus 1/2 m2 v2 square, and this has to be equals to 1/2 of m1, the new speed of the first sphere squared, plus 1/2 m2, the new speed v2 squared. And if we play with the equation, now we can extract actually the corresponding impulse, which depends on something which is called the reduced mass, m1, m2 divided by m1 plus m2, times the difference of speed and scalar the unit direction. And so we can inject this relation into the new speed expression, v1 and v2, and we've got the final version of the speed that take into account different masses. But the thing is interesting and more meaningful when we consider that the sphere have the same masses, and in this case we can note that actually they don't invert the orthogonal component of the speed, but they switch this component. Basically the orthogonal component of v2 is going to be the orthogonal component of v1, and inversely, the orthogonal component of v1 is going to be the orthogonal component of v2. And this is what we see with this sphere. Basically, the one with the greatest speed gives somehow this great speed to the other sphere, and back and forth. So this is obvious when we are seeing this animation, and when we are thinking about like a pool with sphere colliding. But this is not trivial when we have to model the equation, the fact that they actually switch the speed. And of course, as previously, we can use an attenuation coefficient to model some friction, some loss of energy during the process. So as a summary, we have, if we want to model this cube of sphere, first we need to detect the collision between the sphere. If there is collision, then we can change the speed of the sphere in a second step. Then we can correct the position of the spheres. And then we iterate again and again. I just added some steps because if you do that trivially, you may see some jittering, some oscillating spheres. And so to avoid this oscillation, things that you can do is to only apply this elastic collision model if the relative speed between spheres in collision is great enough. And if it's a small relative speed, then you can just add some friction on the speed to avoid this type of oscillation. So you don't make the sphere bounce, but they just reduce the speed. Then you can of course correct the position, and instead of taking the new speed, the integrated new speed, also if you've got very small impact, if the relative speed between the two spheres is small, then we can use also something called position-based dynamics, where we compute the new speed not as the integral of the previous speed, but just saying that it's the new position minus the previous one divided by delta t. And it also helps to reduce possible oscillations. And finally, we can note some result on the collision. So far, we only solved the collision pairwise between the different spheres. So it doesn't ensure that globally, at the end, I've got a global collision-free state. Maybe when I correct one collision between two spheres, I modified their position, and maybe my sphere goes into collision with another one. So at the end, I don't have any guarantee, and also the order in which I'm checking this collision and correcting this collision does matter. I may not have the same result if I check, for instance, all the collision between spheres first, and then the collision between sphere and plane, than if I start first with the plane and then do the collision between spheres. And typically, the one that will be applied, or the collision that will be the more preserved, are the one that will correct last. So if I want, for instance, in my previous example, if I want to avoid seeing any sphere going out of this cube, I should correct the collision with the plane after I correct the collision between the spheres. Because I may have spheres that are still in collision, but I may not see it visually. Well, if one sphere is going out of the plane, I'm going to see it very clearly. Of course, there is also some possible improvement on that. If you reduce the time step of the integration, this is going to naturally improve how the collisions are going to be handled. Also, we can do several steps of iteration over all the pairwise collision, possibly in different orders, but there is no guarantee that we are going to converge toward the collision-free state, but it may help. And in case that we want some guarantee, then we have necessarily to handle the problem globally and to have a global collision solution, in taking all the constraints of all the objects, but this is of course much more costly. And it's quite typical, for instance, to model piles of objects explicitly. We model them using a graph, starting from the object which cannot be moved, and then we go up with all the objects that are attached to it, so that we can work with them separately, avoiding to compute collision between them, or to have time integration between them to be faster and to be more robust. But of course, this research is also computationally costly and need to be handled separately.